you've got to make sure you're paying attention to all pieces. You've got to make sure that you're doing a bit of learning yourself. When a teacher comes, you want to make sure that you're ready to be taught it, not just you want to be taught it kind of thing. Hi, my name's Lachlan, and you're listening to Property Investory.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lachlan, for coming onto the podcast today. I'm super, super excited to be able to hear your story. Firstly, let's start off with saying your full name, what your title is, and since you've done so much, feel free to brag about it.
Thanks, Tyrone. Well, my name's Lachlan Vidler. I'm the director of Atlas Property Group, an exclusive buyers agency. And like you said, I've done a little bit. I started my working life in the Navy as a warfare and logistics officer. And I then went and became a management consultant with some of the big global names. And now I run my own buyers agency.
That's so cool. That sounds like a really cool story. And I love hearing stories from the Navy as well too, which we'll delve into a little bit as well. So maybe let's just firstly start off just by sharing with the listeners what you currently do, I guess, in a day-to-day. Maybe share it with us in 60 seconds or less, or your kind of, I guess, activities for the day.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm sure as a lot of people out there would know, property can be such a full-time thing. And for me, trying to run my own buyers agency, it takes a lot of time and effort. And basically my day, it sort of varies, but the big segments that usually are always involved is chatting with clients, chatting with agents, prospecting with future clients or future business partners. And of course, like any good job, lots of admin.
It's funny nowadays. I mean, I've been going on this sort of spree of just learning a little bit more about future technology and listening to all these different podcasts about the future of, say, AI and also the future of technology. And it just goes to show like how much technology impacts us and influences, but then there's all this other back end stuff that we do that we don't see behind the scenes. And it's always admin, whether it be emails chasing, following up paperwork, contract signing. I have a hunch of those kind of things. And even after, say, for example, this episode, there's still a lot of admin stuff that people don't see that goes into getting the podcast edited and out there. So I totally understand admin is just part and part of daily life. I reckon if I could have a full-time assistant just doing that, I think it'd be more than enough for them to keep them busy.
Well, I could not agree more. I mean, I think you're right. AI and technology has helped out so much. Like, I mean, nowadays we're at the point where we can sign almost all documents online, and like how much time saving is that without having to post to physically sign it? Maybe you got to scan it. I think that's one great advancement we've had, but I'm with you. I'd love to have a personal assistant come in and be able to help out.
Yeah, it's funny because you think that, I guess maybe getting that streamlined process in place, getting things all done digitally online, it just seems like we're able to push more through, which means that we're a lot more busier than we're supposed to be, which is kind of, a bit funny because it's gone the opposite direction. We're having information overload, too much content, too much data, and it was just a matter of now finding what's actually relevant for us as well too. Cool. All right. Well, I'd like to be able to just jump into share a little bit more about your personal story and get to know you a bit more, Lachlan. Let's start off, where did you grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a bit of a different upbringing. I moved around a lot. My parents were quite big in business, so we had to move around as they got new jobs. So I think I ended up going to 10 primary schools before year 5. And that was in Sydney, that was in Melbourne, Brisbane, Auckland. So I moved around quite a lot, and I went to a couple of those cities more than one time as well.
I'm trying to work it out. Okay, 10 different schools in your first primary school, 6 years?
Yeah.
Wow, how did that work? Does that mean that halfway through school or halfway through the year, you'd actually leave and then move to another school?
Yeah, sometimes I can, I'd leave, I don't know, Brisbane on a Friday, and then I'd be starting Monday in Melbourne or Sydney. So,
oh my gosh.
Yes.
Just tell me a little bit more about this business that your father was running. Why that many moves or changes?
Well, it wasn't just one. It wasn't his. He was in sort of senior management roles of different companies. So it could be that, he might have got another promotion, or it might have been that he changed businesses or something like that. But it just meant that, and my mother as well. So it just sort of meant that we were constantly moving for sort of a lot of my early years. But I look back at the time, I think when you're a kid and you're sort of moving and losing your friends, you get a bit unhappy and sad about it. But looking back, it taught me so many great skills about being personable and how to make new friendships and relationships. And to be honest, it probably has helped out so much with what I do now and being able to talk with people.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, I didn't move that much when I was in primary school, but I did move 3 times when I was in primary school. That's why I can relate to that. And it did, change things. And that stability for me was a little bit, I guess, confronting as well. But I guess it was definitely a good thing when I look back at it. I did make a lot of new friends, different schools, different environments, and you learn to adapt extremely quickly, especially when you're young at that age. I don't know what it'd be like for my kids now, because any change for them, they just throw a tantrum. But it is now.
I think a little bit of healthy resilience is great for kids.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't wish my 10 moves on anybody, I think.
Fair enough. So I guess you went to school in different places all around Australia, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and so forth. Did you end up settling down after, say, primary school, or was there still a lot changed?
No, so we did end up settling down, and we sort of settled in Sydney, which was really great because a lot of my family were in Sydney, and we just sort of went back into the local community. And although I hadn't grown up there for the previous 10 or 12 years, it was good getting back with family and some of the friends I had prior. And, I think a lot of people love Sydney, and I certainly love Sydney. So it was a great place to finally sort of have the waters calm.
Yeah, that's great. And do you know the background behind your family, as your father and mother decided to settle down? What was the reason for them to be able to finally sit in one or stay in one location?
I think it was just a little bit of settling within the business world. It was sort of, I think they finally both just found some roles that they were able to settle into. And then, the other factors that come into being in business didn't affect them as much anymore. And we were just able to, settle down. And I think they'd sort of also got to the point where they said, not only are we sick of moving, we're sick of moving the kids. And, it'd be great to just sort of have some stability back in all of our lives.
Yeah, totally. And I can totally understand from the parents' point of view as well too, because it is quite challenging every time you lift up, pack everything, move again. I've moved a few times already with my kids, and my child, who's now 6, he's probably moved about 4 times to different houses in the last 6 years. Just because, there's been changes. I'm a rent investor, and sometimes, places just decide that they want to sell the property. I'm like, oh, come on, guys, tell us to give me a long-term tenancy. So, sometimes it happens not from our, but external impacts and so forth. So, yeah, but it's been good. I mean, we finally settled down in one place that we love to stay in, and happy once again as well. Well, it's really interesting. So you've been through primary school, high school. What happened after high school? Did you go out to do further studies, or did you actually jump into the workforce?
Well, I mean, I sort of did both. I mean, I studied pretty quickly after high school, but I pretty much went into the Navy as well. So I did a lot of my study when I was in the Navy, but I joined the Navy at 18 years and I don't know, maybe 100 days. So I was very green, very fresh, but I was excited to be there. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, out of all the different jobs, I mean, it's great to be able to hear to get into the Navy. Why the Navy?
I don't know. I do know. I think I know. I never wanted to dig holes. So the Army was not going to be for me. And I didn't know whether I wanted to be a pilot or not. So I thought, oh, well, in the Air Force, you only fly planes. And if you don't fly planes, what else are you going to do? And, just spending a lot of my time growing up in Sydney, eventually when we settled down, I loved the water. I loved being on it. I always loved, going to Queensland for holidays and the beach and things like that. So I sort of went, oh, well, the Navy is sort of the last one left. And maybe I should have a look at the Navy and see what I could come up with, and ended up liking what I saw and jumping into it.
Yeah, was there an application process to actually go through?
Yeah, so because I was an officer, people who join as an officer tend to have a bit of a longer application process. But it's like a lot of jobs, you go in and you have an interview, you do an aptitude test, for example. So they sort of get an idea of what jobs you may or may not have the capacity to do. And then from the jobs that you get told you can do, you then pick ones that you want to do further interviews for or further testing. So, you do more maths testing, more physics, more coordination, things like that. And then you just sort of keep interviewing like a normal job process. But because I was joining as an officer, I had to do my last interview in Canberra. So we got flown from Sydney down to Canberra, and we sat on a board, and we had 3 senior Navy officers in front of us, and we were all, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. and they just drilled us with questions for, an hour and a half, to understand what we were about, what we were motivated by, why we were looking to join. And then you either were recommended or you weren't after that.
Gosh, that must have been quite intimidating, especially at that age. I can understand different story when you're 30 or 40, when you've been through that experience, but at such a young age, it's almost like, you got a round table of parents interrogating you.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, even chatting with you now, and I sort of think back on it because it was so many years ago now, I probably have to credit some of the ability to do that from, moving around so much, I mean, I could go into a room even at 18 or 17 and be able to talk with people that I didn't know and that, might be 20 or 30 years older than me. And, obviously you feel uncomfortable still, but I think I probably felt more comfortable than some of my peers who might not have, had the opportunity to develop some of those skills as much as I had.
Yeah, and it really does go to show, because I think when you learn these skills, or I guess get put into the deep end, especially when you've been traveling around, you develop all these great communication and social skills. It really helps, for the long term as well. You mentioned about an officer. Can we just take a step back? I may have missed something, but you
Sure.
mentioned you're an officer before you went to actually apply for this job. How did that happen, or how did you become an officer first?
Yeah, so I mean, in the military, you've got two pathways. So you join as an enlisted person,
Yep.
or you join as an officer. And very broadly speaking, the most junior ranked officer is technically a higher rank than the most senior enlisted person. So you can imagine then you're going to have people like me who are 18 who were technically had a higher rank than people who might be 40, 50, 60 years old. And that's why the application process is a little bit more rigorous for officers, because I want to make sure that they're getting people who can lead or have, maybe not leaders at that time because you could be very young, but the capacity to be able to learn how to do that and have the ability to learn how to do it. So that's sort of the difference between officer and enlisted. And I mean, for me, the reason I wanted to go down that pathway was, I always enjoyed, leading, like in sports or at school. I always felt I could communicate quite well and speak to people. And I liked being able to be someone who made decisions and wasn't necessarily someone who always had to follow as much, So, that's a very simple sort of explanation about the dynamics of rank in the military. But for me, that was why I made the decision to go down the officer pathway as opposed to the enlisted pathway.
Fantastic. So does that mean then during the years of high school, you actually were enrolled as an officer in the army or
No. No. So, I mean, like I said, you do an application process just like any other normal job. I think you can start it at 16 maybe, and you just go along the road. But for example, to be an officer, you had to have finished year 12. So I could never have started that job, while I was at high school. Maybe some people might think of it as like a trade. I couldn't do it that way because you had to have finished year 12 to be able to join as an officer. So no, I did the application process in my last couple of years of high school, but I didn't officially join until after I'd finished the HSC and done all that.
Wow, there's so much involved in this. I've spoken to at least 3 people who I had on the podcast who have been in the army, and they've had some amazing stories. And a lot of them have been very, very successful as well in what they do, because the discipline, the training that they get out of, all the Navy or the army training that they've been through has definitely impacted on how they've been able to live their life as well. Especially in, say, for example, being a property developer, there's just so many moving parts in that. It helps that particular person, to be able to achieve the success that they've had. And I guess it's just really phenomenal, because I seem to see that people who have actually come out from the army, specifically from what their training has, they've actually been able to perform at a much higher level than most of us has, because I think that training is so intense that it helps you get those skills. Has that been what you found as well since actually leaving the army or leaving the Navy?
Absolutely. I think when I look back on a lot of the training and a lot of the experiences I had, I mean, it's certainly not like the movies, we're not all trained up like Navy SEALs or something like that, but the level of training and the things that we do receive and that we are involved in, I think that so much of my success I can trace back to what I learned there and what I trained in there. From my perspective, you're not always going 100% in the outside world or even in the military, but something that the military is really good at training and teaching you how to do is when you have to sort of turn it on and raise your level of performance or take on those really high levels of stress, you learn really great methods of dealing with it, how to break down problems, how to think up solutions. And for me, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've taken away from my career in the Navy is those skills. And I think for somebody in property, like whether you're a developer or just an investor, or I don't know, you might fulfill some other role in the industry, you know, you're dealing with people and their emotions, and sometimes you can get some really time sensitive issues. And, you know, those skills that the military teaches you are so invaluable in being able to deal with that and not pull your hair out going crazy over time.
That's great. So tell me a little bit more about how long were you in the Navy for, and some of the interesting, I guess, stories you might be able to share of being in the Navy.
Yeah, so I was in for 6 years. I originally joined as a maritime warfare officer, and that's the person who, the easiest way to describe it is they're the person who sort of drives the ship. They don't physically have their hand on the wheel, but they're the person standing behind that gives the directions to that person on where to go, things like that. So that was where I first started. But I have a Bachelor of Business degree from UNSW, and I wanted to utilize that a little bit more. And I then went on to do some further study also through UNSW. I did a finance master's degree. And as I was sort of starting to come towards the back end of what ended up being my career in the Navy, I sort of wanted to do something that was going to be able to allow me to transition a little bit better. I didn't actually expect to leave at 6 years when I did, but you know, I knew I was never going to stay for 30 or 40 years. So I wanted to move into a role that was going to be able to give me better skills that were more transferable on the outside. So I changed and became a logistics officer. So, you know, I think a lot of people will probably get the broad idea of what that is, but that's, you know, it's dealing with all the moving parts of, you know, food and fuel and moving the ships to different ports, all the logistical elements that go into that. So it was amazing for my planning skills and my problem solving skills and things like that. But yeah, I guess while I was in, you know, I had some really great experiences. I deployed on 2 operations. I served on 4 different ships. So I was on ships that were out of Sydney, ships that were out of Darwin. I had such a great experience. I think one of the ones I always look back on is I was doing a little bit of study for my finance masters, and I was actually deployed in the Southeast Asia region, and we were going through the South China Sea. Ooh. And it's for the listeners out there, you know, it's a little bit of a contested area. You know, it's still quite safe and everything's fine. But there's a lot of countries up there that feel that they deserve the rights to some of the ocean. And because of that, it can get a little bit contested, and there can be a lot of ships up there. So it was, looking back, it was such an interesting experience, you know, being on the ship in that sort of area, and then having to go back to my rack and do a bit of math study and work out, you know, how to work out the price of a bond, or how to work out how to value a property. You know, it's such a polar opposite experience, you know, 1 minute of the day to the other. So that's probably one of the big memories that stick out for me.
That makes it really interesting. So you're concurrently studying a Bachelor of Business at UNSW. So this was sort of correspondence whilst actually out on the Navy?
So I already had my bachelor's at that point, and okay. I was doing my finance master's. So okay. Yeah, so I was sort of in the tail end of that, and I had a couple of subjects to go, and I thought, I'm going to be away for a while. Do I wait and prolong the degree even more, or do I just try and do it while I was out there? And I'm glad that I tried to do it out there, because it saved me a lot of time. But it was certainly hard switching between Navy stuff to finance and investment stuff.
Oh, I could imagine. So how long were you out on sea normally? Because there would be a proportion of time that you'd be back on land, and then the other time you'd be out on the water.
Yeah, I mean, it really depended on what was going on. So, you know, for one trip, you know, the ship was gone for months and months and months. But the ship is only as good as its people, and people need food and things like that. So usually, from a Navy perspective, ships, and this was part of my role as a logistics officer, is that ships can actually go a lot longer than their people can, and you often need to stop in different ports every few weeks because of things like food to be able to resupply the ship. So yeah, you know, it really depended, but it meant, you know, every 2, 3, 4 weeks think the longest I ever spent between ports was about 6 weeks. And then, yeah, when we came in, we certainly needed some food then.
That's a long time to be out there. I'm assuming submarines and naval ships are very similar, or would they be a different thing? Because when you're underwater, especially if you're going further deep, it's quite hard to come back up all the time and, dock in. Are they usually much longer or about the same time?
I mean, I'll just have to speak a bit anecdotally. I was never on subs, but it's the same constraints. It's always by food. It's always things like that. So submarines are the exact same. They've got to make port every so often as well to be able to resupply. But they have such a more stealthy role in the world. So they're the way that they're set up is so that they can do that role a little bit better than we can when we float on top of the water.
That's great. So can you sort of maybe just share with us what was your day like on the boat every day? Like, I'd be curious. I'm really interested in finding out a bit more. It sounds really exciting.
Of course. I mean, I've been saying it for a lot of things, but I think it really is like any job. Your day is so varied, and it really depends what's coming up or what you've just had. So a lot of the day it might be spent preparing the logistics plan for the next port you're going to. So you might be dealing with contractors that you're going to have to deal with when you get into, I don't know, a port in Malaysia, for example. You're going to need cranes, you're going to need food, you're going to need water, power, things like that. So you might spend the morning dealing with some of those logistical elements. Then, like any good job that we were chatting about, you're going to have some admin to follow up on after that. Then, you might spend a bit of time with your people, getting around the different sub-departments to see how everyone's going, see if people have got issues. And then, you'll want to have a bit of chill out time after 5 or 6 p.m. around dinner time. You want to chill out a little bit there as well and get some sanity back. And then each day is so varied. You might end up having to spend a whole day on admin, or you might spend a whole day on preparing for the next port. It just it was always so different. It was so different.
Yeah, so it sounded like they were able to just go, okay, this is your responsibility. We'll teach the skills how to be able to plan and manage and look for the things that you need to accomplish and achieve in terms of your goals, but you go out there and achieve whatever you need to do to meet those kind of goals. It wasn't like, you had a set routine that you had to do every day, because there are some jobs out there, as particularly admin stuff. It's like, you got to do this at 10 o'clock, you got to do that at 2 p.m., etc.
Yeah. So no, definitely. It was 100% like that. I think, you had your, we call it the left and rights of arc. So that's that gap between the left and the right of an arc is where you have responsibility for. It's a military saying. And they wouldn't necessarily tell you how to do the things in that area of responsibility, but they'd say, you just need to get them done. And,
I love it.
you always had support. You weren't just sitting out there. I wasn't just out there by myself going, oh no, what do I do if I don't know this? You always had support. You always had someone you could talk to, which was so invaluable, being able to bounce ideas off people. I'm a big believer in, collective thought and group thinking. I think you get such a better result if you don't know the answer, to be able to take on the thoughts of a team. And we always had that. That's had that. Awesome. So it was always good.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm the same. I think having collaborative approach is so important, especially in the kind of role I play and work with as a project manager. There's no way that I'd be able to come up with all the solutions. That's why I have teams around me like BAs and architects and so forth, and get them to, bounce their ideas off and share, what they know and tap on their expertise, and then get the support to be able to come together and finalize the project and basically just guide them, in the right direction to get the achievement or the goal that we want to meet as well too. It's fascinating. So back then, without internet, this is going back maybe, 20 years ago, with internet and stuff like that, because did you have access to the internet? Because I'm assuming, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Was internet access just as good, or was it just you had to rely on?
No, it was definitely not as good. You certainly cannot sit there on YouTube or Netflix and watch a show, not at all. But no, we did. I mean, there is internet, but you get it from satellites. So as you're moving throughout the world, you'll get better reception, get worse reception. When we left sort of the Australian coastal area, maybe a couple of 100 nautical miles off the coast, you notice that there was often a massive drop in connectivity, and it always made it difficult. It's sort of the nature of the beast. You can do emails, that's usually fine, but trying to get on the web to be able to see different things, it could be challenging, but it's something that I think will always be an issue for it's navies everywhere. I mean, it's boats anyway. You know, you could be on a cruise ship and you're going to have similar issues. But you know, with technology going at the pace that it is, I don't think it'll be too long before we get to a point where people can at least exist somewhat happily with the connection out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I guess the reason why I asked that question is it a necessity to have that connection? Because obviously we're connected by cable, we're in the suburbs, you know, mobile reception is fantastic here, can't complain. It's like the norm, you know, you click on something and instantly you send the message off to whoever it is and you just get a response back, you can call and so forth. But when you're out in the Navy, as you said, logistics officer, you've got to plan for contractors, you've got to actually get involved with whatever else you need to do for the port planning. Is that a necessity to actually have them communicate this quickly, or is it whenever you get close to reception, you just send it off then and then just wait and then come back?
It's a mixed bag. You know, there's some stuff that, so like there's there's phones all around the ship, and most of the phones are for the internals of the ship. So like you can call another phone, but you can't call out. But on a ship, for example, there are always a few phones that can dial out that I think it used the satellite connection to dial out. And for example, someone that does logistics or maybe the ship's captain, they might have a need to be able to speak with those people. So you could do it that way. But the thing with internet was always, it's more about like keeping the crew happy and a bit of that mental health aspect, you know, being away from, like, people don't go on, like, I mean, you can't get on eBay anyway because of, you know, like organizational blocks, for example, but people didn't want to do that. I mean, when you leave home, people just want to be able to chat with their friends and family. And I mean, email's okay, but it's not instantaneous. So people want to be able to get on their phone, for example, and go on Facebook Messenger and be able to just have a chat with their partner or their family or their friends. And it's definitely a massive mental health thing. And as technology improves and we can deliver a better service in that aspect, I think it will really help people dealing with the isolation of being away from home for so long. But yeah, it was certainly more about that and that connection with people back home rather than just, you know, surfing the internet for the sake of it kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I guess it's been really interesting having this conversation because you learn so much that you don't really hear too much, you know, in what goes on. Because when you think about due to COVID and, you know, the changes in isolation and people being working from home, that's also been a big issue and a topic. And it kind of relates to what it is without that connection with people. Because usually when people are in the office, they're able to, you know, walk over to a ward cooler, have a chit chat, bump into people in the corridors, have that kind of connectivity and that interaction with people. But now everyone's so isolated and you're literally next to your wife or your kids and stuff like that. It can be a bit, you know, confronting to have it so much. So I think I can understand from that point of view as well. It's very similar that we all need that kind of interaction as humans to you know, have different connections as well. Well, that's been really, really interesting. Let's move on then. Since finishing with the Navy, you mentioned that you went on to management consulting. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Tell us a little bit about that story behind, you know, that career.
Well, you know, like I mentioned earlier on, I've got a Bachelor of Business and I've got a Finance Master's, both from UNSW. So I invested a lot in getting not just an education, but a really good education. And I did that because I always knew that I was never going to be in the Navy forever. And I sort of, when I was thinking about getting out, I looked around and I tried to think up some of the jobs that I wanted to go into. And I think consulting was such a natural fit for me because it sort of took on some of the unpredictability and of the Navy, where you could be just doing, you know, you don't do the same job for 12, 18, 24 months. Like, you get that variation. And you get to do a lot of problem solving, and you get, you know, you get to meet such interesting people. And I just had a really good opportunity where I originally went to Deloitte. Deloitte was my first company that I went to, and I just had a really good opportunity with them. And I interviewed a couple of times, and they kept inviting me back for more interviews, and they seemed like they were interested in me. And then when I got the offer to join them, I thought, you know, like, Deloitte is a global name. Like, I'm about to go from being in the military, which, you know, there's a bit of prestige about, and people respect people that join the military and come out of the military. But to be able to then have my first job out being with such a global name, like, I couldn't pass that up. I had to jump at it.
Totally. So what did you, I guess, do at, just curious, what did you do at Deloitte as a management consultant? Because some people may not know exactly the kind of things that
Yeah,
you would have done.
of course. Well, I think so. The best way to describe a management consultant is that organizations, companies, government, whatever it might be, might have some problems, or they might not necessarily have a problem, but they have something that they need help with. And they turn to consultants to come in and help them with that. So obviously you have a bit of expertise in the area that you deal with, but you sort of end up being a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, and you get really good at problem solving. You get really good at dealing with people at a senior level within organizations, and pretty much you're there to help them solve their issues.
That's great. And I'm really curious, was there like frameworks and type of things that you need to come up with? Because, there's the stock standard proposals, requests for, quotes and tenders and those kind of things when you're actually managing and working the project. I guess in your time and dealings, did you have those skills that you developed while you're in the Navy, which you could transfer across into management consulting, or did you actually pick up these new skills while you're working at Deloitte and, learn pretty much on the job?
All of it. I think, like problem solving to me is a pretty simple task, like there's so many different methods and there's different frameworks and things like that. But at the core of it, like for example, all problem solving is about breaking down a problem, working out the different parts, and then working out a solution to those parts, like it's a pretty simple concept. So I think coming out of the military, I had so many of those skills. I had like that way of trying to think about problems, which was great. But then going to a company like Deloitte, they have their own frameworks, like intellectual property frameworks, things like that, about how they like to deal with problems or how they might want to present solutions to problems. So it's sort of a mixed bag of all of it, really. I took what I knew, I adapted it for working in business, and I sort of just went from there.
Yeah, excellent. How long were you at Deloitte for?
I only had a short stint with them. I was only there for about 6 months. Then I moved to my current company, Accenture, which is another really big name, and I'm doing similar work for them. So it's been really interesting seeing the way different companies work, even working within the same industry. But it's been such an interesting ride so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing the same thing at Accenture as well?
Yeah, so doing management consulting, and I do quite a bit of work with government, for example. But much the same work, much the same, just looking at problems, breaking them down, and helping organizations be better and more efficient and more effective.
Fantastic. Well, what I love to do now is to probably jump into talk a little bit about your property journey and start off with actually, I guess, how you got into property firstly. Let's talk about your first property. How did you find that first property in start your property journey?
Yeah, well, I've always loved the idea of investing. I've always loved business. I always knew that the way to get out of the rat race, so to speak, was to invest in something. I knew that from a young age, and I think I was probably about 12 or 13 when I made my very first investment, which was in shares. But that was definitely what sort of stoked the fire. But as I got a little bit older and I educated myself, formally through university, but then, the amount of hours I've spent on the internet just reading blogs and different bits of educational material, I started to come around to the idea of property more. And I think the thing that really grabbed me about property was leverage, and the ability to leverage and the ability to more safely leverage. So you can do it with shares, and that's called margin lending. But because of how volatile shares are, you might have to pay that money back a lot quicker than you expect. And I think a market like COVID, people would have been caught out doing something like margin lending, and it would have hurt a lot of people. But with property, you leverage through a bank, or commonly through a bank, and it's not often that they ever come to you and say, you need to pay back your loan today, or you need to top up tens of thousands of dollars. So for me, that was such an eye opener. And then being able to then, take, 50 grand and invest in a $300,000 or $350,000 property and get the growth on the 300/350 instead of just the 50, to me, that was the cherry on top. I sort of thought, is this some big life hack? Am I seeing the world through some crystal ball that other people just can't see? So that was sort of how I came about property. But when I first started out, I knew that I didn't know a lot. I like to think that I was smart enough to know that I wasn't very smart about property yet and I needed to learn, but I also knew I didn't want to wait. So I actually used a buyer's agent for my first purchase. I thought, you know what, I'm going to investigate. I'm going to find a buyer's agent that I can mix well with, I gel with, we get on a human to human sort of basis. And obviously that they're going to help me out. And they presented me with properties, and I did due diligence on top of their due diligence. But being able to have that help first up taught me so much that I didn't have beforehand. And then I went and I did the finance masters, which changed the way I looked at investing and finance and money and things like that. And that really solidified it. But yeah, I'm not afraid to say I had help with my first purchase.
That's great. What was the experience like for that first purchase? And tell us a little bit about that property.
It was, I guess, on the whole, it was a good experience. You always have bumps along any sort of property acquisition or property research journey. But on the whole, it was pretty good. I think, like a lot of people, my BA experience was that we worked out what I was looking for. We worked out my price point, and that, I needed something that was going to grow, but something that was going to allow me to build sustainably. So it couldn't, I couldn't be working on like 4% yields or maybe even 4.5% yields, especially with the lending. I needed to make sure that I was matched up with pretty close to neutral or a bit of positive, but had to have that growth. So when those properties were being presented to me, I 100% made them work for their BA fee. I looked at all their diligence. I was contacting agents in the area. I was validating every word that was on the pages of research to make sure that it was a good decision and that it was going to be right for me. And it turned out it was a place up in Brisbane. And we got it for quite a bit under market value. I hate using that word. I think it's a bit of a misnomer. The market's what people pay for it, but we got it for a price that was probably less than what it was potentially worth. And it's been tenanted from, week 2 of owning the property, and it had quite a good yield. And it's I think it's had, the last time I checked, it's had sort of annualized growth of maybe 6 to 7%. So it's been quite strong. I think a lot of it was in the early stages where by getting it at a good price, we caught up with that. But it's been a great first property to hold. It's been low maintenance, great tenants, great growth, sort of ticked everything.
That's fantastic. And I guess this first property, did you actually go out and have a look at it as well too before you purchased it, or it was pretty much based on all the research?
Not at the time, no. I did sight unseen on that. I mean, we had a lot of reports around it to make sure that it was fine, and did a lot of due diligence. Absolutely had it inspected quite a few times to make sure it was all good. I did visit it later on. I didn't go inside. I just did a bit of a drive-by when I was in Brisbane one weekend, and it was exactly how it looked in the pictures. So I thought that's a big win. I haven't been sold a dud here, but yeah, it was good. It was good.
Fantastic. And since then, you've built up a portfolio of properties.
Yeah. Sorry. No,
go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah. My partner and I, we've built up a great portfolio. We've sort of done multi-region. We got some up in Brisbane. We got some down in regional New South Wales and in some of the big sort of hubs down there. But like a lot of people, we found our lending got capped out pretty quickly, and we had a lot of cash and equity available to us. So we then transitioned, and we've been doing that a little bit more recently than acquiring property. We went into property development, luxury property development. So
great. So how many properties have you got in your portfolio currently?
So we're down to about 4 now. We did a bit of a rebalance and looked at what wasn't performing and wanted to keep our portfolio nice, and then moved into the property development space. So we wanted to have a bit more firepower and ammunition behind us for that.
Absolutely. I love property development. It's something I'm passionate about too.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about this property development. What inspired you or got you motivated to jump down that path? You mentioned it's just lending. Was that something else, or did you just actually want to start accelerating, maybe growing your portfolio even further?
Yeah, I think it was definitely being able to supercharge it. So the development we're in currently, it's a syndicated investment. So we're on with a couple of other people, but that was more out of being able to leverage into a very, very high value, lucrative development that we couldn't fund by ourselves. And for us, it was residential real estate, and I mean even commercial. It's really good. You can get some good cash flow, good growth, but being able to turn around on a development and getting possibly, I think in property development, you really want sort of 13 to 15% annualized returns. I think anything higher, and it's very risky, and you're probably having someone sell you a pipe dream that's not going to be true, or maybe it's, after fees, it drops down considerably. And then anything below that, you're not really being compensated for the risk you're taking on. So for us, yeah, it was being able to turn around, get that incredible growth in our investments, or annualized growth, but over, an 18-month timeline or a 24-month timeline, be able to pull it out and then go again.
Yeah, that's very common though. I think with any development, and that's the thing, depending on where you're developing and where you're going, 18 months to 24 months is pretty good time frame. Some of them I've been part of has been going on for 3, 4, 5 years even as well, and depending on how risky and big the developments are. So that's really, really interesting. I guess you've invested in, both buy and hold and now property development as well. I'm sure you've experienced quite a lot of interesting things. Maybe share a story about perhaps maybe one of your biggest challenges or worst investing moments you've had over this period of time.
I think, I've been fortunate. I haven't really had too many what I would call worst, investment things. We've always done extreme due diligence. We've always validated everything. So anything that sort of occurred, it hasn't been great, but it hasn't been the end of the world. And I think one of the things that comes to mind is one of our properties, we bought it, and in the first maybe 6 months, 7 months, every piece of maintenance you can possibly imagine occurred. I'm talking, at one point we had to get a bobcat out to dig up the backyard, because part of the sewerage pipe had, I don't know if rot is the right word, but it had separated away from one of the other sections of the sewerage pipe, and it was causing, obviously issues with the sewerage, and there was just all these things going on. And the tradie that came out to fix it said, like, mate, the best thing that we can do for you is it's going to cost you, but we dig up the backyard, we'll weld it back together, and we'll fit it, and then it should be okay for, the next 10 or 20 years, whatever he said. Or we can do a small fix, and it could last 10 years, but it could also last 6 months. So it's over to you what you want to do. And we just decided to accept the upfront cost of a more long-term fix. But yeah, worst ones I can think of.
That was pretty bad, actually, to be honest. You think about that, to have to dig up a backyard and to picks up sewage. That's the worst thing to actually, think of, because I've been through not something similar, but I've had a roof completely leak, and it'd been leaking for like probably years, but we only discovered it not long ago. And we initially did a patch up for about 6 months. It didn't even last for 6 months, to be honest. I think it was about 3 months, and you think, could get through it, because I was waiting for the winter to pass before we did it. But I had to bite the bullet, because it was just leaking so bad that we had to literally replace the whole roof. And it actually just finished about a week ago now. So I'm like, finally, it's all done.
Oh, that's great. I think not a worst moment, but a funny moment. One of our properties, where my partner's got some family in the area, and the family, they've got, trade qualifications and things like that. So if we ever need something within their realm, they're often able and happy to just go out and help us out. And, we'll either just pay cost on the materials, but we won't pay for labor, something like that. But one of the properties, the tenants, there was like an old heater in the place, and like, it wasn't really that old. It was more of just an old style. Anyway, there seemed to be an issue with it, and the tenants called up and said, "Oh, it's not working." And my partner got one of our family members to go down and check, and I said, "Oh no, it's working. I don't know what happened. It must have just been a bad day or something when you tried to use it." And it went away, and then a couple of days later got another call that, "Oh, it's still not working." It turned out that the tenant had been calling the property manager for quite a number of times, and what it really was that they just didn't know how to turn it on, but they just kept saying that it didn't work. So thankfully, we weren't sending out, other tradies, that it was their business, and we were paying call out fees and all these things. But yeah, that was quite a funny moment. It just turned out that they couldn't operate this heater.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that too. It's embarrassing. Even like I'm like so surprised. Like one guy told me, one investor told me that he had a tenant who didn't know how to turn on a light switch. A light
Oh
switch.
God. Oh my God.
And literally, they sent the property manager out there, and that night they said, "Okay, you flick it on, flick it on." Oh,
you wonder how some of these people just survive in the world normally, don't you?
yeah.
It's so funny, some of the stories that you hear about in the property industry, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. That's why I love hearing these amazing stories, because they just really show some insight into reality of what we face and what we see that goes on in the real world. You know, you think that the internet's not working. That's a first world problem. The most simplest things. You just
Absolutely.
go, wow.
Oh, it's comical sometimes. You think that they're making a skit like Saturday Night Live about some of the things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think, man, I should just get a video camera and a full crew there just to record, just to capture this.
Oh,
just
absolutely.
for giggles and, cack up's sake. Oh, wow. All right. Well, on the flip side of, you've been through some challenges. You've shared with us about the sewage in the backyard and, having to get that fixed. But on the flip side, have you, maybe that there would be a moment in time during your journey where you had everything just like click for you? Maybe share with us that aha moment that you would have experienced during that time.
I think that there's probably two that really come to mind. The first one I sort of talked about earlier, which was when I really came to understand about leverage and how leverage works in property compared to other industries. I think that was probably one of my biggest aha moments, and just being able to understand the power. I think it's just incredible. When I speak with some of my clients in my presentation, there's a slide that I put out, and it's about that $50,000 investment, and it's about over 30 years using statistics from the RBA and Vanguard for the share side, and showing how much it changes. And I think off the top of my head, over 30 years, just the value of the property alone, it goes up to about 2.5 mil on a $300,000 purchase, versus shares, which have a higher return rate, but when it's just a return on $50,000 instead of the 300, it only goes up to about $750,000. And I mean, I don't just mean only $750,000, but relatively, you're talking 50K in property and it goes to 2.5 mil, or 50K in shares and it goes to 750,000. It's mind blowing. And whenever I show clients that, they are always gobsmacked. They can't believe it. I had a guy yesterday who, when he saw it, he was literally speechless, and he even said, "I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say to that because I didn't understand it." So that was probably, sorry.
I was going to say, and what I love about property as well, you get a physical asset. It's not like you're buying paper,
Yeah.
Share is like a paper.
Absolutely.
Something could go wrong, the company could go bust. You lose all that money.
Absolutely. And, there are so many investors out there that want to be able to see something. You obviously get the backyard investors who only invest in their backyard. But even if you take that out to the people that are happy with that borderless investment model to get the most bang for their buck, they still can hop on a plane and do a drive-by, and that is such an invaluable thing to so many people. So I think you're right. That tangible asset is just amazing. It's amazing.
Huge. And you really, really, hit the nail on the head, saying that 50,000 compounded and invested into a property, which is a growing asset, is worth like 2 mil in 30 years. I mean, you work it out, like how often can you actually just make that kind of money without working? That's the thing. But people even in their lifetime to work and earn that much is not even possible.
Exactly right. I mean,
I'm basing on average income, I should say.
Yeah. But I mean, it's so true though. Like, so I think the last time that I saw it, the median wage in Australia was about a bit over $80,000. And, even if you take that over 30 years, people aren't going to be anywhere near that sort of return. And you just buy one house, obviously that's not the solution. That's not going to give you, proper long-term wealth creation. But if you just bought one house for 300K and you let it sit there and you let, time and compounding take their effects, you're going to end up with an amazing result. Result.
And plus, you would eventually pay that off and you got yourself a free asset.
Exactly right. And that's over 30 years. It doesn't account for any value adds you do. Like, you even just throw in a 10 grand, 15 grand reno on a kitchen and a bit of cosmetics on the outside, and you can get 2 to 3 return per dollar that you put in. It's incredible. And that, like you said, that's just letting it sit there. You do nothing, and that doesn't even account for the rent you take in either. That was just purely the property value.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Well, I think if people can see this on the screen, because we're recording this as video, and that'd be great to show people. Oh, good. All right. Well, I'd love to just jump into and talk a little bit about the strategy behind what you've been able to do. As you said, you've built a portfolio now, and you've jumped into property development as well. Can you just share with us what's been just the key strategy that's helped you build your successful portfolio at this point in time?
For me, it's been all about combining growth and cash flow. It's there's no point building a 2 or 3 property portfolio if you're then going to be capped out for the next 10 years plus, because you're going to get the growth, and we just talked about the growth, and that's great and all, but I think that a lot of people who invest in property, their ideal world, whether they want to say it or not, is where they've got $1 billion of real estate and they're the richest man in Babylon, whatever it is. That's what people would love to happen, but then pragmatism comes into it and they realize that it might not be possible. So for me to even get halfway there, I like Grant Cardone's philosophy of the 10 times rule, where you imagine 10 times what you really want, and then when you fall short, you're still well past what you ever needed or wanted. So for me to be able to do that, it was really about matching growth and cash flow. So I had to make sure that we picked areas that were going to have great growth prospects and look at it over the long term. What's it going to do over 10 years? We all want it to move in 18 months or 2 years or 3 years. Sometimes, no matter how good of a property picker you are, it's never going to happen. And you've just got to be a bit pragmatic and go back and go, all right, over 5 years, maybe we'll get the growth at that point, and that's fine. And that's okay. And, you're not going to end up with $1 billion empire, but you're still going to end up in a phenomenal position. But you got to be able to keep having the power to leverage through the bank or through other means. But for most people, it's through the bank. So we had to match cash flow. So I think that usually the bottom yield that I would ever accept is probably about 4.5%. And even then, I'd have to be really stoked with the growth prospects of a place like that, because it's so much harder to increase, your day-to-day income. So the better way to do it, I've found, is to match the income of the property so that it either pays for itself or it comes pretty close to it. So yeah, I think for me, that's been the strategy. It's been trying to balance the growth versus the cash flow.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I've always had this same, I guess, question that people always ask is, how do you find these kind of growth properties? Because it's not something you can actually predict. You don't even know if things are going to move up like 10 times or whatever it is, especially like when you see in the Sydney and the Melbourne boom, no one would have expected to double that much in such a short period of time. You don't even know when to time it. And then same thing with the positive cash flow. That's a little bit easier because you can actually see based on the rental income and its past track record history, you can actually use that to, I guess, work out if it's a good positive cash flow investment. But how do you go about that kind of research? Is there a specific kind of checklist or due diligence process that you undergo as well?
There is. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, though. You can never 100% predict. You look at all of the metrics you look at and you make an educated assessment. Fortunately, property is quite forgiving. And like I sort of alluded to earlier, you might not get it in that first couple of years, but usually you'll get a bit of protection on the back end if you've bought somewhat in an educated manner. But for me, I look top down and then I keep coming down. I think there's 15,500 suburbs in Australia. And, that goes from Broken Hill, where I'd hazard a guess that, over 30 years, you're not going to get the best return as you would for Harbourfront Sydney. But, you've got to be able to break it down. And for me, it's about trying to combine a lot of things. You want to look at what's going on in the area.
So, Lachlan, how are we determining the suburbs that you'd be choosing from like the 15,000 different suburbs that are available to pick the right place or the right property to be able to invest in?
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's like you said, there's 15,000 suburbs. It's really difficult to be able to work out with absolute certainty, and it's impossible to work out with absolute certainty what's going to happen. But for me, you know, I start with a real macro approach, and I look at the top down, and I try to understand what's going on in an area. You know, there's so many property research companies out there that a lot of the listeners will be aware of, and everyone takes into account different things. I'm still trying to work out what I think are great drivers. You know, I think that you're always trying to evolve and understand, and you know, after a few years, you might realize something's not as important as other things. But I think that evaluating growth, it really comes down to some really common principles. You know, you're looking at supply and demand. You're looking at the reasons why somebody might want to live in an area, you know. So I think when you're looking at that, you've got to look at the metrics that reflect something like that. So you're looking at, what does the suburb or the surrounding suburbs look like? Are there good amenities? Is there good transport? Does it have good livability to people? Like if you know, you might not want to live in a particular area that you invest in, and I've invested in places that I would never want to live, but I know that people do. But I can still understand that there is some sort of livability factor to the area, you know, and that keeps going down to, you know, is there employment? Is there some population growth? Is there all these things? And there's no crystal ball to work out what level is 100% right to dictate it. But to me, I look at those and see if there's some good trends. And then I guess I keep getting down lower, and then I look at, you know, what are some of the supply and demand characteristics of a couple of the suburbs that I'm starting to identify, and then even down to some of the streets. You know, are we starting to see vacancy rates coming down? Are we seeing rents going up? What is it that's going on? What is it that is driving the changes in these areas? And then after that, you know, I sort of sit back and I look at it across a couple of different suburbs. You know, you can't just look at one in isolation. You've got to look at what is it that all these suburbs, and I do it across state as well. I might look at, you know, 5 or 10 things in a suburb in Brisbane, but they're not compare the same to a suburb in Victoria, because I want to be able to try and compare apples to apples, and I want to be able to see if there's trends. You know, having a finance background, I like seeing trends. I like seeing things that I can try to quantify. And then after that, I think that a bit of common sense comes down to it. You know, does it look like a property somebody would want to live in? Whether that's you or not, you know, does it have just a solid foundation? Is it, you know, a good couple of bedrooms? Does it have a couple of bathrooms? Does it have some backyard for if kids want to be there? Let a little bit of common sense come across over the top of your investing, and then that sort of then make a jump. You know, every time I invest, my heart races. Even still, you know, I think that it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking. You're never going to know how it turns out. But to me, when that happens, it's like sport. You know, you get that adrenaline rush. You're a bit nervous, but you usually play better. And I find that's the same with me.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that too. And that's quite common with most investors, especially when you're investing into, you know, properties that are not like, you know, $50,000, $20,000 or something like that. You're investing in an asset that is anywhere between $300,000 to $1 million sometimes. So
yeah,
I'd be surprised if your heart wasn't racing.
Yeah, particularly when you sign the loan paperwork.
Absolutely. So Lachlan, let's take a step back as well and talk a little bit about your why. I'm sort of jumping to the mindset, but I want to know, what's been the reason why you wanted to invest and build a property portfolio for yourself and your family and so forth?
To me, I think it's really simple. I wanted to be able to have a better life for me and my family. And I've heard a lot of people, you know, within property or other ones sometimes say like, oh, that's, you know, that's not the true why. You know, you got to go deeper than that. But I don't think it is. I think that is a perfectly reasonable response, and it's what it's about for me. And for me, I want to be in a position where I work because I choose, and that gives a better life to my family, because I could be there more, I could be there less, depending on what's happening at the time. I don't want to be stuck on the age pension when I'm, you know, into the later years of my life, because I know that it's not enough. And unfortunately, so many people, and there'll be people out there listening who have family members that on it, that know what a struggle it is if that is your only income, if that's your only source of money. It's so difficult. And I know that when I get into my 60s or my 70s, the last thing that I want to be thinking about is, can I pay my rent? Can I buy food? I want to be able to go, can I buy my grandkids a nice birthday present? Or can I take the family on a holiday overseas when I'm in that 60 to 70s age group? So for me, it really was all about wanting that better life for my family.
Excellent. I like that. And what I'm also curious about is over this journey that you've invested in your time, you've met your buyer's agent, your first one to be able to help you purchase that property. Did you also meet along other mentors that sort of helped you on this property journey? Because you've obviously had a lot of great mentor support and through the Navy, through management consulting and so forth. But for property, is there any mentor or people that has actually stood out that has helped you along this way?
It's a really good question. I think I maybe don't have one person that stands out, but I'm a big believer in having a great team around you. And for me, I think that the one person that stands out is my whole team. You know, that's my broker, my accountant, my friends that have invested. It's then the people, like you said, that out of consulting and the Navy. It's my whole team more than just one person, because I don't like to just listen to one perspective, because you never know what's going on behind one perspective. It's, you know, even the best friends are sometimes going to give you bad advice, not necessarily because they mean to, but just because of their own experience. It might not actually end up being true or right for you. So I've tried to surround myself with an overall great team and take all of their opinions. And I will often hear something from one and I'll go to the other, and I won't ever go, oh, so-and-so said this, but I'll say, I've heard this recently. What's your experience? And then I validate it. So I know it doesn't really answer your question 100%,
Oh, no, it's great. I mean, it's really true, because the fact is that sometimes when people tell you something, you don't believe it face value, and even with family members as well too.
Oh, the worst, isn't it?
The worst.
Worst.
It's because you have that strong trust in them and you believe whatever they say. But the thing is, until you validate it, they may not have ever invested in property, but they're telling you, giving you property advice. That's probably the worst I've heard of.
Well, how many people in obviously non-COVID times would be around the family barbecue or the family dinner table, and someone's got a story about property, always, whether it's about a bad investment or, you know, a bad property manager that they're renting from, or whatever it is. Someone always has a story. Someone always has a perspective, or, oh, this area is about to boom, you'd better get in there. Like, I've seen lots of people lining up outside this house. The whole area must be ready to go. You know, all those things. But so often it's never really validated. There's never really anything backing it. And because, like you said, you trust them, or your family or your friends, whatever it is, you're always inclined to believe them maybe a little bit more than you should. And it's gotten so many people into trouble. I've chatted to so many people through, you know, my buyer's agency, who come and they say some cracking statements to me. And the first thing I say is, so why do you think that? How is it that you've got to that thought? And they tell me, and then in hopefully a couple of sentences, I give them a pretty different perspective, and then they go, oh, okay, that actually makes a lot more sense than what I possibly thought of beforehand. So it's funny, isn't it? There's always a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also backing up with the evidence and facts behind you to be able to put things back in logic. Because the thing is we based a lot of our decisions on emotion, but if you take a step back and take the emotion away and you base it on facts and figures and so forth, usually those things are the ones that will actually get the best result. And that's what I've learned anyway, because I've done so many bad decisions as well emotionally, because it's just so easy to just go, oh, I believe that one, but then I trust that person, and then go, oh.
Oh, mate, I am a big believer of that, I think. But, you know, to me, mistakes are good. Like, you don't want to make really bad ones. You don't want to make mistakes that are going to have a significant and detrimental impact on you later on. But you got to make some mistakes, because it's the best way to learn a lesson. It's the fastest way to learn something. It's it then helps you to understand how you can change more than just one thing. You know, when I've found that, you know, maybe you went through the wrong bank, for example, but then you also work out a couple of other things out of that. Like, maybe you work out, I don't know, that you had a bad broker, for example, and there's a couple of other things you realize through one mistake. So it's never just, I don't think it's ever just one thing you learn, but the emotional ones, it gets people all the time.
Absolutely. Talking about, I guess, mentors and resources and so forth, do you have any particular books or even, I guess, audio books as well that you could definitely or recommend to the audience as well, that you really, find has helped your journey?
I reckon I've read every property book under the sun, and unfortunately, what I've worked out is that a lot of them were written in a time that doesn't necessarily reflect today's conditions. You know, you got people like Steve McKnight or Michael Yardney, where you're talking about buying up property and then living off the home equity loans you take it off them, and a lot of that's just not possible these days. Like the theory behind a lot of what they say is great, but practically you can't apply it anymore. So I think I love all of them. I love reading them. I think it's great. I think you should always expand your knowledge, and by doing that, you can then also, and putting your own experience, the lens of your own experience over the top, you can work out what's true and what's not. But you'll still pick up some things that are great. But for me, I almost think that today the best thing you can do is like getting out and reading current blogs from reputable websites, or listening to podcasts from people who have current experience in the market. I think that at the moment there's not too many books that are better than doing those two things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Times have changed, and I think we all just need to learn to adapt to what the changing markets are, and seek experts and people who actually have been there and done that and can actually adapt to these current market conditions is so important. So I totally resonate with what you've said there.
It's interesting there though, because I've just had a thought as well.
Yeah.
The new responsible lending laws, with the changes that are going on with that, who knows? Maybe we might actually see a move back, maybe not to what it was 10 or 15 years ago, but I have a feeling that over the next couple of years, as things start to ease around the easing of those laws, we might see some of those things that could come back into play a little bit more, a little bit more borrowing and a little bit more capacity to leverage yourself, and some looser borrowing checks and criteria going on. But it'll just be important for everyone to make sure it works for their circumstances and not put themselves in bad spots.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that responsibility lending, as they've said it as well. I think the interesting thing about that is because due to the pandemic, it has affected a lot of people. And I think the government's trying to do some way to stimulate it, whether it's through this stimulus package or cash handouts, which have been doing a lot lately.
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe in all that, because, they're trying to stimulate the economy, but if people are in hard times,
you're going to save it.
Yeah, they're going to save it. So I don't know. It's very interesting. We'll see. The only way to know is we'll have to wait and see. Only time will tell.
Oh, absolutely. We'll have to have a chat in 12 or 18 months, and we'll see what's gone on and see if we were right.
Yeah, that's right. It'll be fascinating to hear what happens. Okay, well, I'd love to be able to find out a little bit more about your thoughts about, say you took yourself back 10 years ago, and you got a chance to meet him and said, look, Lachlan, what would you say to him if you had that chance?
I would say jump more. I mean, I've always thought that I'm a pretty decisive person, but I think that if I could go back, I'd say take every opportunity and jump at it faster. It's get that property a week earlier, and maybe you negotiate a better price, or engage with this person a little bit earlier, and maybe you get a better relationship with them. I think that I would say go back and take more risks by moving earlier.
Absolutely, that's great. And then looking forward to, say, the next 5 years, what do you think you're most excited about?
Well, I'm really excited about growing our business, Atlas Property Group. I'm so excited to be able to help other people create long-term wealth. I think that's going to be so exciting, and already got some great clients who have been really happy with our service and product, and we just like chatting with each other. Some of them just call me up and go, "Oh, hey, how you going? What are you up to?" That sort of thing. So I think for me, that'll be a really big focus for the next 5 years. And then I think I'll need to make sure that I don't let my own property journey suffer at the expense of the business. I'll have to make sure that I keep devoting time to find properties for myself, not just clients, and keep doing the developments, things like that. I think just keep ticking along my own circumstances, not just helping out the great clients that we work with.
Fantastic. You've got a lot on your plate coming up then, So that's good. It's very exciting. It keeps us alive as well. I think that's what you're doing is fantastic. And you're going to be able to impact a lot of great people as well too. So last question for you, Lachlan, is how much of your success is due to your skill, intelligence, and hard work? And how much of it do you think is because of luck?
Oh, of course, 100% due to my own skill. I think, isn't that the right answer? Nah, I think, I don't know who it was that came up with the quote about it, but, the harder you work, the more luck you have. I think that's so true. I've never seen that more than working on my own business and then working on my own property investing. The harder you work, the more opportunities fall into your lap. You got to educate yourself. You got to have a bit of skill and a little bit of talent, but after a while, I think that the things that come to you because you're working hard, it's because of that. It's not because you're in the right place at the right time. You were in the right place at the right time because you'd done the work prior to know you had to be there. Something like that. I think that's my answer. But yeah, of course, it was 100% my own skill.
Love it. I actually resonate with you on that, and I agree, because I think the harder you work, you got to prepare yourself for the opportunities that come. If you're not prepared, then and the opportunity comes, unfortunately you can't take it. It's like the teacher will appear when the student's ready. It's like that.
Love that. I love that. You're so right. You're so right. It's there's so many hardworking people out there, and they work hard, and they're always waiting for their big break. And it's not for a lack of trying, but you got to make sure you're paying attention to all pieces. You got to make sure that you're doing a bit of learning yourself. When a teacher comes, you want to make sure that you're ready to be taught it, not just you want to be taught it kind of thing. Is how I think about it. Anyway.
Totally. Fantastic. All right. Well, Lachlan, if people want to connect with you and find out a little bit more about your services and even just find out a little bit more about your journey, what's the best way they can connect with you?
Well, we've got our websites. That's just atlaspropertygroup.com.au. And then we've got a great social media presence as well. We're across Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Follow us on that. We're really active. We post lots of content, not just about the services we give, but also about education. We're big believers in educating people so that they can make better decisions for themselves. So you can find us on our website or on our social medias.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again, Lachlan, for coming into the podcast and sharing your story. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the audience as well too. Wanted to say big thank you for coming on and sharing your story. So once again, all the best and great success with your property investing journey and developments.
Thanks, Tyrone. It's been amazing to come here and have a chat with you and go from being not just a listener, but now to coming on and having a chat. So it's been great. Thanks, mate.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.